Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. This is The Excerpt. Today, Donald Trump won't rule out military force when it comes to his aims for the Panama Canal and Greenland. Plus, we have the latest on a major wildfire in Southern California, and Washington and the world. More in Jimmy Carter's passing. President-elect Donald Trump won't rule out military force to acquire Greenland or the Panama Canal. I caught up with USA Today White House correspondent Joey Garrison to put some of Trump's comments on the two places, as well as on Canada, in context. Hello, Joey.
Hey there.
So, we've heard a lot of news over the last couple of days regarding possible actions that Trump wants as soon as he takes office, everything from solving the Gaza hostage situation to issuing major pardons. But there's also another story that's kind of creeping back into the news cycle, Joey, and that has to do with Greenland and the Panama Canal. So let's focus on that last point today. What did Donald Trump say here as it pertains to those two places?
Ever since the 24 election that he won, Trump has increasingly been floating these ideas about acquiring the Panama Canal, which of course is a major access for ships getting through, as well as Greenland, which is rich of minerals, an island, of course, in the North Atlantic Sea that is owned by Denmark, as well as Canada becoming the 51st state. Now, the instinct for many people were to kind of brush off these comments. People were wondering, hey, is he serious here, joking around? Well, at Mar-a-Lago during a press conference on Tuesday, he was pressed more about these ideas, and he was asked specifically, could he rule out military or economic coercion to try to acquire the Panama Canal and Greenland? And he couldn't rule it out. And he was pressed specifically on the military use front multiple times. And I think it speaks to the degree that Trump is serious about really making it a part of his agenda during this second term to try to get those two areas, Greenland and the Panama Canal. During his first term, he had briefly talked about purchasing Greenland, but it was never something that was executed. And it seems that he's making this part of the platform moving into here now less than 2 weeks before he takes office.
Well, Jay, I think it's still a little unclear, what functionally he really is trying to accomplish with some of these comments. What's the sense that, just in terms of what he's trying to do here, and would his aims for Greenland and Panama specifically even be possible?
First of all, starting, why he wants these things. Panama Canal, he's, referenced the original agreement from President Jimmy Carter, of course, who just passed away, but the agreement he reached in the late 1970s to give the Panama Canal later control to Panama. He's calling that a disgrace, accusing the Panama Canal Authority of charging more for the entry of U.S. ships than other nations. Trump has said that China is effectively operating the canal. He says this needs to be in U.S. control. One of the lines he said yesterday, they charge more for our Navy than they charge for navies of other countries. So this, again, kind of fits into this Trump theme that we've seen over the years of, saying the U.S. is getting screwed compared to other nations. And when it comes to Greenland, as I mentioned earlier, rich with minerals, only has a population of about 56,000 people. Trump says it's needed for, quote, national security purposes to help the U.S. He also went on to question whether Denmark, which again controls Greenland, has the legal right to the territory. And he said that if Greenland does not become part of the U.S., he would, quote, tariff Denmark at a very high level. So again, the actual mechanics into getting these are still a little unclear. Is it going to be to continue to mount pressure on Denmark to essentially give it up in some sort of treaty? Is he willing to go that far? I mean, the more he presses this thing, it's going to increasingly tick off a lot of American allies.
Well, Jay, you mentioned kind of ruffling feathers of American allies. Do we hear from any of the potential players on this issue, thinking Greenland itself? You mentioned Denmark, Panama, Canada's involved in this conversation. I mean, what do any of these leaders say?
Yeah, some of the leaders there pushed back quickly and strongly to Trump's comments. Of course, his comments about Canada come one day after former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau resigned. But Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Melanie Joy, said that his comments, quote, show a complete lack of understanding of what makes Canada a strong country. There's been polling in Canada that show their people want to stay a country and not join the U.S. Trudeau, actually, even though he's no longer in office, came back with a much more blunt comment saying there's, quote, not a snowball's chance in hell that Canada will become part of the United States. And then we heard from the Danish Prime Minister, again, reiterating that the leaders in Greenland have been very clear that, quote, Greenland is not for sale and it will not be for the future either. So these various nations, or the people that control Greenland and from Denmark, very assertive that they're not going to have no interest in having join the U.S. from Canada's perspective or Greenland. And so this is already setting up kind of a dispute between the U.S., Trump's administration, and other world leaders before we begin Trump's second term.
Donald Trump's son, Don Jr., visited Greenland this week. Is there any relation to that trip and what Trump Sr. is saying on this point?
Well, Tyler, I mean, yeah, it's impossible to ignore that trip. Trump Jr. arrived in Greenland on Tuesday with a small group of people. As this comes, as Trump, his father, continues to openly talking about acquiring it, it really raises eyebrows. Now, a spokesperson for the president-elect's son said Trump Jr. would not be meeting with government officials, and instead said Trump Jr. showed up there to shoot a fun podcast video. But nevertheless, I mean, I think it's clearly sending some sort of signal about intentions when the president's son, who of course is very close on a lot of policy matters with his father, when he shows up in Greenland while Donald Trump is talking about acquiring the island.
Fascinating times. Joey Garrison covers the White House for USA Today. Thank you, sir.
Hey, thank you.
A fast-moving wildfire fueled by dangerously high-speed Santa Ana winds continues to threaten Southern California neighborhoods. Some 30,000 people have been evacuated, while huge plumes of smoke were seen hovering over Los Angeles. Officials said the Palisades fire charred nearly 3,000 acres of the Pacific Palisades area between the coastal California cities of Santa Monica and Malibu. There was no containment as of early this morning. California Governor Gavin Newsom declared a state of emergency yesterday and urged residents to heed evacuation orders after he witnessed several buildings already destroyed by the blaze. You can stay up on all the latest with usatoday.com. Illegal immigration at the U.S.-Mexico border dropped to a 5-year low this week amid the holidays and the Biden administration's ongoing efforts to contain unlawful crossings at the border. U.S. Border Patrol logged an average of 1,000 daily migrant encounters in the 7 days that ended on January 5th along the U.S.-Mexico border, a senior U.S. Customs and Border Protection official told USA Today this week. The agency has not seen average daily crossings at that level since April of 2020, according to the official. Then it was the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic when global travel and migration slowed dramatically. Migrant crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border typically dip right after the winter holidays, but the early January average was a quarter of what it was during the same week a year ago. The number of migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border has swung dramatically during the administration of President Joe Biden, surging to record highs in 2022 and 2023 before dropping in the administration's final year to levels not seen since the first Trump administration. The remains of President Jimmy Carter arrived at the U.S. Capitol for the final time yesterday for a service with members of Congress before the 39th president lies in state. I spoke with USA Today Congress and campaigns reporter Savannah Kuchar to get a sense of the scene in Washington. Savannah, thank you so much for hopping on today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Savannah, yesterday America watched as a horse-drawn procession carried the late President Jimmy Carter's casket to the U.S. Capitol. Would you tell us a little bit about those scenes?
A casket with the late president's remains were transferred from Georgia, flown up to base in Maryland, and then taken in a procession down the streets of D.C. We did see a transfer ceremony at the Naval Memorial in D.C. from a hearse to a horse-drawn vehicle. And the ceremony on Tuesday was to mirror Carter's inaugural parade back in the 70s, a procession from the naval base up to the Capitol.
All right, so I know you were inside the Capitol for this congressional service that then happened afterwards, Savannah. Tell us a little bit about this. Who was in attendance and what was it like inside?
Well, it was a really moving and obviously very solemn service. There were many leaders and members of Congress in attendance, along with Vice President Harris and Second Gentleman, as well as Mayor of D.C. Muriel Bowser. Members of Congress were there, including leadership, who all honored him, including Senate Majority Leader, House Speaker, and the Vice President all delivered eulogies on Tuesday. And, of course, members of Carter's family were all there, gathered on Capitol Hill to honor him. The casket was taken up the front steps of the Capitol building before being brought into the rotunda for about an hour-long service. It was a very moving service, including the Naval Academy Glee Club. They're giving the performance.
And Savannah, in general, what have we been hearing from major political figures? You mentioned a few of them in the wake of Carter's passing last month.
President Joe Biden has, of course, given statements honoring Carter and his legacy, as well as former presidents from Trump to former President Clinton, and along with Carter's fellow commanders-in-chief, other political leaders have noted his legacy and memory.
Okay, so he's now lying in state. Savannah, we've heard and seen this before, but what does it actually mean to lie in state?
From Tuesday evening and now through 7 a.m. Thursday morning, Carter's casket will be on the Hill, there for the public to come in, pay their respects, honor this former president. Any members of the public can come in. There's no public photography, or they can't bring in flowers or envelopes or anything like that, but they can come and visit his casket.
Okay, so Carter's funeral is now set for tomorrow, Thursday. President Joe Biden has also declared a national day of mourning. What's the general expectation for tomorrow?
Right, so on Thursday, there will be a national funeral at the National Cathedral in D.C. President Biden will be there. Following that, his casket will be brought back to Georgia for a private funeral at a church in Carter's hometown of Plains, Georgia. So there will, like I said, be both a national and a private funeral for the president.
All right, Savannah Kuchar covers Congress and campaigns for USA Today, joining us from Capitol Hill during this week of mourning, remembering the late Jimmy Carter. Thank you, Savannah.
Thank you.
As President Joe Biden's term as the 46th president of the United States draws to a close, we look at his legacy in the sweeping arc of history. What accomplishments is he most proud of? And what regrets, if any, does he have? USA Today's Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page was given the exclusive opportunity to speak with President Biden before he leaves office later this month. Susan joins USA Today Editor-in-Chief Karen Bohan to share her insights and impressions from their conversation. You can hear that discussion right here, beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on this feed. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.